So you're thinking about moving to Toronto. In today's video, we're going to be discussing whether it's better to buy or rent in the city of Toronto. So let's get started. If this is your first time to this channel and you want to know everything about living and moving to Toronto, then you're definitely going to want to hit that subscribe button, hit that bell notification so that you could be the first to know about the current market here in Toronto. My name is Amanda Azeredo, and we get calls and emails daily from people just like you who are looking to make that move to Toronto, and we absolutely love it. So whether you're looking to move in 9 days or 90 days, we can definitely help you out by clicking on that link down below in the description box. Fill out our call form so that we can set up a call to help you make that smooth move to Toronto. So let's get started with today's video. Toronto is a continuously growing city that is attracting a lot of different professionals, families, and investors from all over. That being said, let's get straight into what are the pros and the cons when it comes to either renting or buying a home in Toronto. First thing we're going to tackle is the pros and cons of renting in Toronto. Let's start with the pros. Pro number one is going to be flexibility. Renting in Toronto definitely gives you some flexibility depending on your lifestyle. If you are constantly kind of changing things up, or maybe you don't really know if Toronto is going to be your permanent home, for example. But if you're someone who is needing that flexibility when it comes to housing, renting is probably going to be for you. The reason for that, of course, is the fact that you have the flexibility to move without having to worry about having to sell your property, as an example. If you're unsure about long-term plans, then renting might be the solution to give you that freedom about changing your plans if need be. Second pro for renting is going to be predictable costs. As a general statement, when you are renting, you have pretty predictable monthly costs when it comes to your rent. Of course, that does change, but not as frequent. For this reason, renters don't really need to worry about unexpected costs that come with home ownership. Pro number three is going to be options and amenities. Now, depending what you are renting and where in the city, so it could be, a residential home, kind of like a 3-apartment home, or it could be a condo or an apartment building. So it really does depend on what the circumstances are, but usually you have a lot of amenities that you wouldn't normally have for most people, especially living in the city of Toronto, if you had a home. So for example, a lot of these buildings do have gyms, right? They have pools. They have all these different things that you wouldn't necessarily have if you just had a home in Toronto. Of course, just so you understand, it does depend where, right? Because there are very affluent, rich neighborhoods that do have pools and people have gyms and things of that nature. But for the most part, for the average person living in Toronto, you're not going to have access to these things if you have a home. So you will if you are renting. So now let's move on to the cons of renting in Toronto. Con number one is you do not have any equity. This is definitely going to be the major con of renting, is the fact that you're not building up any equity when you rent versus buy. Instead of investing into an appreciating asset, what you're basically doing is paying for someone else's mortgage. So you're paying for someone else's appreciating asset instead of your own. And what this essentially means is that you're probably you're not going to be benefiting from the fact that you could be having an asset that could be appreciating and be worth more in the future. Con number two is limited control. And what I mean by that, as a renter in Toronto, you won't be able to do some big changes to the house or renovations or anything like that without the approval of the landlord. So you have to remember, because it's not your property, you do not own the property, then you can't make any changes and you can't really live in the dream home that you always wanted. Con number three is going to be lack of security. And what I mean by this is very simply that as a renter, you kind of don't have a choice. If the landlord has good reason, they can tell you to leave within a certain amount of time. So it just depends on the situation. But when you own a home, you don't have to worry about that because you own the home. So no one can essentially tell you to leave because it's yours. Whereas when you're renting, it isn't yours. And there could be things, depending on certain situations, where you could be asked to leave. All right, so now that we talked about renting, let's quickly move over to buying a home in Toronto. What are the pros and cons? Let's start with the pros. Pro number one is going to be building equity. When you decide to buy a home in Toronto, not only are you acquiring a new place to live, but you're also building equity in a city with a very strong real estate market. The value of Toronto properties have been appreciating over time, which means that as a homeowner, you have the possibility of benefiting from this increase. You're essentially investing into an asset that is appreciating while at the same time being able to have a home to call your own. Pro number two is stable house costs. So essentially, you always know what your mortgage payment roughly is going to be versus there are rent increases. So you really don't know, right? Your rent can go up whenever the landlord chooses to do it. Well, here in Toronto, at least every year, the landlord is allowed to increase your rent. So the likelihood that they'll do that is very high. So your rent will be increasing every single time, every year that you're there. Compared to owning a home, you have your mortgage payments, you have it at a fixed, rate. So you kind of know what your mortgage payments are going to be. So you have that consistency. Pro number three is going to be security. Like I mentioned when we were talking about the rent, at the end of the day, based off the situation, the landlord can kick you out, essentially make you leave, right? But if you own your own home, you have that security knowing this is your home. There's no one that can tell you to leave because it's yours. So that security is there. Pro number three is customization and personalization. Owning a home in Toronto means that you can personalize your home to however you want because it is your property. This means that you can renovate, upgrade, and change anything you want to make it your dream home. This level of personalization and the ability to create your dream home are significant advantages of home ownership in Toronto. All right, so those are all the pros of buying a home in Toronto. So now let's talk about the cons. Con number one is going to be the high initial costs. Toronto's competitive real estate market means that the initial cost to buying a home is going to be quite high. You're going to need to put down a pretty big down payment, which is at least 20% of the property value for the most part here in Toronto. This can be quite a big financial hurdle for a lot of people, especially first-time buyers. And then, of course, you need to consider other costs when it comes to buying a home, like closing costs and so forth. Con number two is going to be the maintenance expenses. When you own a home in Toronto or anywhere for that matter, this means that you're going to have ongoing maintenance expenses with that home. And in Toronto, where there is a lot of older homes, that's more common here, you will need more repairs and maintenance costs. There's just going to be more expenses because of the fact that they're older homes. So keep that in mind when you are looking for a home, that might be something to consider if you are buying an older home. It is essential that you budget for these types of expenses because they could add up over time. After digging up a little research, what I found is that it is roughly between 1% to 3% of whatever your home value is. That's what you're going to be spending on maintenance costs for the year. All right, so here's an example of what I'm talking about, just so you can get an idea, a rough estimate of what those maintenance costs can be. So that's going to be all of our pros and cons when it comes to buying and renting in Toronto. So now that leads us to the big question. Is it better to rent or to buy? And you might not like my answer, but the truth is there is no such thing as a one-size-fits-all answer. This is really going to depend on you as a person and your personal situation. Why do I say that? Because it really does depend on different things like your financial situation, your long-term goals, and your lifestyle preferences. All of this comes into factor as to knowing what is better for you as a person to rent or to buy. Now, I do think that for most people, the answer is going to be buying a home versus renting, just because you are building up equity. It is a smarter financial decision, but at the same time, that is not the case for everyone, because it really does matter what your long-term goals are and what your financial situation is. It is always a good idea to consult a professional real estate agent so that they can help you make that decision. Now, of course, you can always reach out to me. All of my information is in the description box down below. Fill out our call form and we can definitely discuss what would be right for you and your situation. Thanks for joining me on this deep discussion about whether we should be buying or renting in the city of Toronto. I hope that you found this video valuable. If you do, give it a like and leave a comment down below and let me know if you're renting or buying. If you want to see more Toronto videos, then you're definitely going to want to check this one out next. So until next time, guys, see you around the city and God bless.